Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be looking at a variety of ways, really unique ways, to help promote the Sustainable Development Goals, to eliminate poverty, to eradicate hunger, to combat climate change, and many others. My guest today has got some very innovative ideas. Michael Smolens is the founder and chairman and CEO of Dotsub LLC. Michael, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate you being with me. We're going to get into Dotsub in just a minute and all the unique programs that you're doing, but I was fascinated with your resume. In it, you had, for the first 32 years of your life, you were an entrepreneur, a philanthropist to some degree. You started a lot of businesses in Mexico, Haiti. Oh my goodness, I couldn't begin to name all the countries. Tell us a little bit about it, very briefly, about the entrepreneurial activity and what you did and why you did it.
Yeah, it wasn't the first 32 years of my life, it was 32 years after
of
college.
Your life. Yeah, that's right.
And I had one real job in New York. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and then I quit that job after a year and started doing business in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, after Papa Doc died and his 19-year-old son, Baby Doc, took over, because I met a Haitian in New York and he wanted to go back to Haiti, and I was 23, single, not a care in the world. So I just went for it, and I started a business in Haiti that grew over 20 years to 4,000 employees. I spoke fluent Creole. I was going back and forth to Haiti 20 times a year. And in 1991, President Bush, the father, declared a trade embargo on Haiti. I lost everything, many millions of dollars. And after sobering up from that experience, I had been infatuated with Eastern Europe, so and they were starting to think about something called the EU, so I explored all of the countries in Eastern Europe and selected Hungary and became the first American to privatize a company in Hungary in '91, and we bought a very large industrial park 150 kilometers south of Budapest that had 5,000 employees, and we had the government fire 4,800 of them. And we built that factory with a joint venture in Romania during a time there was no trade relations, into producing 25 million t-shirts a year in Hungary and Romania, with cotton yarn coming from India, Pakistan, and Turkey for large US brands for European distribution. And so I had a huge amount of exposure to all of the countries in Europe, Africa, Central Europe, Asia, and just love that culture. So, and then I did a privatization in Azerbaijan in a cement plant, and I helped with the privatization in Egypt for a beer brewery. So I've been all over the world and have a really deep and profound understanding and appreciation for other cultures and other languages.
And how did you get started on this? You're from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky originally. Neither one's exactly the epicenter of the world, but we still have international interest. How did you get launched on that? You mentioned you were 23 years old, I think, when you first started your first enterprise.
My sort of disease of cross-cultural communication happened when I was a sophomore at Carnegie Mellon, and I saw a note on the bulletin board: do you want to spend a summer in Marawi City, Mindanao Island, the Philippines, as a visiting professor writing a remedial curriculum in mathematics? I was a math major. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't understand it. I signed up but was accepted. I learned how to speak Tagalog, and I spent 2 months in Marawi City and Mindanao Island in the southernmost part of the Philippines, and I convinced the Ford Foundation to fly us around Asia for 4 countries. So that was my very first cross-cultural experience, and it took me until my mid-50s to realize that that's really where I got really enamored with the concept of being in other cultures.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly been a fascinating ride, that's for sure.
Well,
it's really remarkable.
The ride is just starting. It's a much better, it's a great ride. I'm on a great journey right now.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about one of your businesses, Dotsub, and our viewers can go to dotsub.com, dotsub.com. What is Dotsub, and why did you start that?
Well, Dotsub sort of was conceived in 2004 when I saw Michael Moore's movie Fahrenheit 9/11. And I said, well, here's a documentary film in English that potentially could change the outcome of a presidential election. What if I could create an easy-to-use browser-based tool that would enable any film or any video in any language to be available in any other language? And at that time, it was a couple years before YouTube started, a couple years before smartphones started. And from my first, 32 years, I had no experience with technology or media, but I really had a deep understanding. So I came up with this idea and started the business. And in the very beginning, I was working with the TED conferences and brought them the idea of the TED Open Translation Program. And we work with large companies and small companies. And that's really what Dotsub does. We specialize in internal and external corporate communications.
Now, before we go too far, TED conferences, we were familiar with, most of us are familiar with them a little bit here in the U.S., but our show goes worldwide. What exactly is the TED conference? Just roughly.
Oh, well,
I know you don't own it.
No, TED was started in 1984 by Richard Saul Wurman, who I saw this week in Paris, and he sold it to Chris Anderson in 2003. And until about 2006, it was a very exclusive event. It cost a lot of money that people heard the brightest speakers talking about compelling things. And they eventually started making it available on video so you could watch it, and then they launched something called TEDx to have people around the world. So TEDx events are happening all over the world with really interesting people doing talks, so it's just really spreading ideas globally.
It certainly is. Now, you gave a TED talk in Taipei, Taiwan.
In Taipei, Taiwan, right.
What was that about?
Well, it was the first time I ever spoke about my sort of favorite title that I have. The titles of founder, chairman, and CEO are relatively traditional. I'd been a CEO my life, and someone joined the company that wanted to be a CEO, and I said, great, and I had to think of a title, and I tried to think about what it was that I do the best, that's the most enjoyable and the most valuable. So I came up with the title of Collector of Puzzle Pieces, and my talk in Taiwan was about the thinking behind that, and basically many people they think I might be in the jigsaw puzzle business, but basically I am very, very lucky to be very clear about my vision for my life and what I want to do with my business. And so when you have total clarity and when you have the passion and perseverance to do it, the real difficult thing is to let go, to just not try to control your destiny. It's very spiritualistic, you might say. So that's what it does. And the collector of puzzle pieces is I know what my puzzle looks like and I know what pieces are missing. So as I do a lot of traveling and networking, I try to find people that can help me complete my puzzles. So that's what the collector of puzzle pieces is.
That's quite a title. That's a very unique title. Now, how much of your, well, I won't ask you how many pieces, but how much of your puzzle is completed? Are you 80% there, 90%, or getting close?
Well, that's a really good question. I've never really thought about it, because as I'm completing puzzles, there becomes bigger puzzles to complete. And if you're wanting to talk about the SDGs and this,
we're going right into
okay, and so really what I realize that I'm doing is I am creating something called language enabling at scale. In other words, there's a translation business in the world. It's a $53 billion industry. It's growing at about 10% a year, and we're focusing on moving image content or videos or film. And that is the way, that's the dominant way that people communicate, educate, entertain, inspire, etc. So we're enabling that to be in multiple languages. And as I'm doing it, I'm realizing that there's about 5 billion people in the world that don't really have access to most of the knowledge, and none of them have it in their native language, because my mantra has been for many decades something that Mr. Nelson Mandela said: when you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his head. When you speak to him in his native language, you speak to his heart. And that is something that is so profound and subtle but powerful. And many, many people or companies think that everyone in the world speaks English, so they don't need to speak to them in their native language and spend the time to do that. But the cost of doing it is petty cash. It's relatively nothing, and you create a much deeper relationship of trust and understanding of the story that you're trying to tell. So that's what we're doing. And the whole part of the United Nations SDGs is to creating really deep and profound relationship with billions of people. And in order to do that, the information about them has to be available in the languages of the people that you're trying to help.
Now, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were adopted in 2015, as I recall, by the 193 member states at the United Nations. They came online January 1, 2016, will run through 2030. And the idea is, as I mentioned in the opening, to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to combat climate change, to have a healthy environment just on across the board. How did you decide to pick up on the Sustainable Development Goals? What led you to those 17 very laudable goals that billions of people around the world are working towards, but many don't even know they're working towards them? But how did you get into that?
Well, I was very aware of what the predecessor to the SDGs, which is called the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. It was created in the year 2000 by Kofi Annan to 2015, and Ban Ki-moon expanded those. And the point is that everything that I'm doing at the end of the day is involved with creating impact and communication. It's something that I've always had for-profit businesses, and because I live a 15-minute walk from the UN and I've known a lot of people, I got very aware of and very involved and could see how what I'm doing is very impactful to the SDGs. And so I'm working on some programs that I think could add a huge amount of value at little or no cost to the SDGs. And one of the sort of comments from a business point of view or a revenue point of view is 2 years ago in 2018, there's a British consulting firm that's very closely aligned with the UN called Business Fights Poverty. And they gave out a brochure, and I was at one of the UN week events here at the United Nations, and in that brochure they had a graph that showed a projection that between 2018 and 2030 there would be 12 trillion, that's with a T, not with a B, dollars spent by governments and corporations supporting the SDGs. And I said, wow. That's $80 billion a month. Even if they're wrong by 400%, that's $20 billion a month, which is a huge amount of money. And then I started looking at it, and I see that lots of major brands are spending tens of millions of dollars aligning their purposes and their goals with the SDGs. And as looking at this, I realized that there's this huge opportunity to not only do good, to have impact on a lot of people, and to language enable at scale, but to align with the SDGs to allow large companies to have their corporate social responsibility and other interest align with all of these things.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website, you have a computer, you like our shows, and you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at some very unique approaches to help people better understand the UN Sustainable Development Goals, goals to combat climate change, to empower women, to eliminate poverty, and many others. My guest is an expert in this area. Michael Smolens is the chairman and CEO of Dotsub LLC. Michael, we're talking about the Millennium Development Goals, and before we get into your programs, why do you think they're important? For you as an individual, you as an entrepreneur, you as someone who's been around the world, started businesses, but why are these so important?
Well, they're so important because they're at the core of everyone's human existence. And the point is, they're all very, very achievable and common sense, but they traditionally aren't looked at as the end goal for for-profit companies. Most of the work on the SDGs is attacked by nonprofit companies, which is all wonderful. And I just think that there's a huge opportunity, especially since all of these giant companies want to support, and with B corporations and impact and sustainability, and especially with the advent of climate change. And the single goal that I am most focused on is gender equality. I personally think that with 60 to 70% of the countries of the world not really allowing women to equally participate in their economy, that asset of all of this brilliance and smartness and ability, that if that asset were freed to the world, that could have just an exponential impact. So I'm very, very focused on doing a lot of things with gender. One of the most recent things, if I can talk about it, is, once again, as I've said, I'm very, very much a spiritual person, and about 5 weeks ago, through a friend, I was introduced to someone who was in New York, and she said, "You got to see him for dinner." He was here from Jaipur, India, from a company called Jaipur Rugs that I had never heard of. Lo and behold, in the next 3 weeks, I spent 20 hours with him, introduced him to a bunch of friends, and it turns out that Jaipur Rugs is a 40-year-old company that has 40,000 women weaving rugs in their homes, in their villages, in their hut, and in 600 different villages. And for most of these women, it was the first job they've ever had, the first time they've ever made money. They started to have a different relationship with their families, with their children. And so this is an amazing opportunity for gender equality at huge scale. And in speaking to Yash, who's the person I met, I asked him what was his next goal, and he said to try to understand what the women dream about for the evolution of their life. And I said, well, wow, I'm working on a program called Dreaming Without Borders that I've been working on to enable students and villagers in the world, 4.7 billion of them, to express their dreams for their life, and through technology and evaluation and video to help these people move in the direction. So we're aggressively and quite rapidly moving in the direction to help a gender equality thing in a large operation in India, and it came out of nowhere.
And that is such an important project. You mentioned Yash Ranga. If I could put in a plug, he was a guest on this show about, I guess, 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. So if our viewers would like more information on Yash and Jaipur, they can go to globalconnectionstelevision.com and scroll way down. But he was a very interesting guest. What do you expect to come out of this at the conclusion? What type of follow-up will we be doing to see the effects of your intervention at different points along the way? But what do you hope? I mean, you already talked about the goals, but what would you really like to see come out 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now?
Well, my sort of medium to long-term goal is to continue my personal journey and take all of the knowledge and insight and learning that I've had to enable, hopefully, billions of people to have the opportunity to improve their situation in life. Because I think that as this happens, and as income inequality is exponentially increasing, and the differences between what people have and what very wealthy people have is very, very different, I think there are ways, through the SDGs being one of them, to really, really help move the world in a different direction. One of the ideas is, with all of the $1 trillion a year supposed to be spent on the SDGs are very little known around the world. I travel a lot. I have dinner with 6 CEOs. None of them has ever heard of it. So one of the ideas I had is to create something called SDGs Without Borders, to enable all of the media and stories that are written about any of the 17 SDGs, about gender, about climate, about hunger, about health, to be available in an open translator platform like we did with TED, but so anyone in the world could translate an article, a video about one of the SDGs. It would be available to easily see. So this would give an opportunity for the people that are trying to be helped to be aware of it and to become much more contributing to that kind of a program.
That would certainly be very valuable to do that. Do you have a timeline on when you would like to bring this to fruition and put it online?
Yesterday.
2 weeks ago.
But you know, but there's only so much that one can do in a day, and you only have so many resources. And as I speak to more people, they're getting very, very interested in this.
That's very true. And you bring up a very interesting point. There are thousands of organizations, non-governmental organizations such as Rotary International, Lions International, that are involved in promoting some SDGs. Some are promoting all 17 of them, but so often people are working, organizations are working on them, but their members are not aware of them. Then there are literally billions of people working towards them who are with faith-based groups, labor unions, with environmental groups, business groups, just on across the board, but they're not aware that they're working on the SDGs. And you're right, the visibility needs to be raised, and they're so very important. You're certainly doing an excellent job in this area.
Yeah, it's sort of the language enabling is something that sort of opens my eyes to some opportunities. Without getting into any specifics, I recently was at an event at the UN where a $20 billion company in the world had a program to impact 2.5 billion people over 30 years. And I got to speak to some of the senior executives at the company, and I said, what percent of your story, your media, do you have available in the languages of the people that you're trying to help? And I got a blank stare.
Right.
They hadn't
Exactly.
thought about that.
Yes.
So the point is, there's a lot of people that are really smart, that view the world from a different perspective. And I think organizations need to take the time and effort and a little bit of money, not in order to be able to communicate to people in their native language, because only 6% of the planet speaks English as a native language. Everybody thinks India is an English-speaking country. Less than 1% of the Indian population speaks English as their native language. So this is a whole opportunity in the world for us to provide this language-enabling solution to people that are trying to have impact. And this will get, I think, tens or hundreds of millions of people to be aware of what's possible. That's what we're doing.
Well, Michael, as you move forward in our last minute, maybe the hardest question, what do you see as your major challenge as you move forward with your programs and your projects?
That's a really good
Hardest question.
No, well, no, but it's actually, I've done a lot of thinking about that, and my biggest challenge is to remain calm because the acceleration and the excitement and the energy is exponentially increased. And when I'm not calm, I don't make the best decisions. And so I'm spending a lot of time while all of these exciting things are happening to try to make sure, and I sort of have an internal barometer that sort of says like tilt, and so I calm down so that I can be as calm as I can be, as close to 24/7. I play tennis 6 to 8 hours a week. So the personal thing is for me to remain calm, because I can't do this if I'm not.
I think those are words to live by. We should remain calm to make better decisions. But Michael, this is very important. I'm glad to see too that you're focusing on all 17 goals, but number 5, gender equity, is just so important to empower women, because all the studies show that when women are educated, when women have control over their own lives, when they make their own health choices and what have you, that the family improves, the society improves, and they're a pivotal player in every society around the world. And of course, we've heard how important that is, and of course now we bring in the climate change crisis, which is a major crisis that affects all 7.7 billion of us. But these issues are so very important, and I'm delighted that you came today to bring us up to date on what you're doing, and I want to wish you well in the future, and keep us posted on how this goes, because it will be very interesting to watch.
If I had to pick 4, it would be health, climate, education, and gender. Those are the four.
Bingo. Very good. Well, Michael Smolens, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.